There are at least 3 techniques to improve profits and margins, not only for contractors, but also business owners in general. Hey, it's Scott Beebe with Business on Purpose. Make sure to go check us out, mybusinessonpurpose.com/healthy, and you can get that numeric metric of the health of your business. Every day, you're waking up and chaos just seems to reign. Material delays, pricing volatility, other owners and subcontractors and vendors, they're all running around like chickens with their head cut off, and you're trying to figure out what in the heck are we doing. The labor pool seems to be vanishing, and recession is on our doorstep, if not already here. Those aren't the greatest challenges, though. We know what the greatest challenge is. Of all these elements are leading to the question whether or not you are even in the right business. Because as much as you try to be present at your daughter's softball game or your son's soccer match, or simply focusing around the dinner table, you don't feel that present because chaos is consuming you. You wonder, how can I keep going if all I'm doing is robbing Peter to pay Paul? How can I have plenty of work but not plenty of cash? Why do those other business owners seem like they're crushing it while I'm wasting away just trying to keep up? Some of you are like my friend TJ, who asked that great, powerful question, what happens to me, or what happens to my business if something happens to me? The professional chaos is taking a toll on your personal life. And so let's try to stop that today. Most business owners are convinced that they are not generating enough revenue. Well, in reality, that's usually not true. The cause of their concern stems from not the volume of the revenue generated, but instead from the amount of revenue that is retained and kept. It's the proverbial back door of profit being left wide open. Most career business owners do not have a revenue problem, although growth in your revenue can be valuable. Most owners have a number problem. In other words, you don't know your numbers day to day, so expenses creep up while revenue fluctuates up and down and profit begins to drip out. We live from big receivable to big receivable, living life like a real roller coaster, complete with all the feeling of sick and green. These are at least 3 techniques that we're going to deploy and share with you to see if we can do a better job of improving those profits and margins. So let's talk about the first. First, to controlling your cost and knowing your numbers is to simply subdivide your bank accounts. When we first met Steve, he was running a $7 million custom home building company in the prestigious California market. The first week of 2020, Steve had $64,889. So think about that. $65,000 of cash to run $7 million worth of projects during a year where his local municipality would eventually shut down construction for 6 weeks due to COVID protocol that year. The same year, his volume contracted actually from $8 million to that $7 million number. In other words, he would both lose revenue in 2020 and would lose 6 weeks worth of billing in 2020. And to make matters worse, of the $65,000 he had in his account, he really only had access to about $32,000. The rest of it was already scheduled to be spent on subs, materials, and other near-term payables. Steve was going into an already uphill year of 2020 armed with a water pistol and a Kit Kat bar for nourishment. Needless to say, he was a little bit freaked. But one thing Steve now knew that many of you don't, and it's leading to the chaos you feel. Steve knew how much he had available to pay his taxes, to pay his subs, to pay his team, and to pay himself. Most of you are looking at the money, and you're missing the true story. Steve knew because Steve had a system. Now, Steve made one decision, and this decision is spelled out beautifully in Mike Michalowicz's important book, Profit First. In short, when a dollar comes into your business, immediately subdivide that dollar so you know exactly where that dollar has to go, starting with yourself. Now, there are 4 real barriers you've got to overcome before making this shift. And it is a pretty simple shift. But it's still a barrier you have to overcome. There's 4. Number 1, your own mindset, believing, that's too many bank accounts. Get over it. Shift to it. Number 2, your bank wants to charge you for all those multiple accounts. Well, go find a different bank. There's plenty out there, especially small local banks, that won't charge you fees for extra accounts because they realize that the deposits are in their best interest. Number 3, your bookkeeper is a barrier you'll have to overcome. They're going to scrunch their nose and say, hey, this is too many transactions. Not really. And number 4 is your CPA. You know, the one constantly lecturing you as to how you can just do this and track it on a spreadsheet. The reality is you won't. So let's jump those barriers and let's for a moment suspend our disbelief and instead embrace the idea of subdividing our bank accounts. Remember, not knowing your numbers is causing frustration and distance with those that you love, so let's do something different. The second technique to controlling your cost and knowing your numbers is to create a simple dashboard that tracks your cash every week. Steve said, hey, but my online bank statement tells me how much money I have in each account, and QuickBooks tells me how much I'm owed. Well, yeah, Steve, technically you're correct, but in order to understand your profit and your margins, we need a means of tracking those numbers long term. It's nice to know your cash or receivables or payables or cost of goods on any given week, but it's even better to know those each week over months and years where you can watch those trends go up and down. We feel the same about the weather. That's why forecasters constantly tell us where today's weather is compared to where weather was from previous weeks, months, years, decades, or even centuries. What it does is it gives us context. It doesn't make the weather any different today, but it does give us context to how hot or cold or temperate that weather is today. The Level 2 Dashboard is a tool we have built and installed in hundreds of businesses around the world, from architects to remodelers, to bankers to lawyers, to jewelry warehouse owners. The truth is, a dollar is not a dollar. That dollar must be artificially subdivided so we know which part of the dollar is ours and which part of the dollar is not ours. So now Steve trains Mindy on how to take 5 minutes each week, update that dashboard, and each week the entire team knows how much cash is available to the penny for profit, owner's compensation, quarterly tax liabilities, operating expenses, etc. They also know how much is needed to be paid out over the next 30 days. The third thing they know, how much available cash the business has if all the payables were paid today. And finally, they know how much would be left if we grabbed all of our available cash, all of our available receivables, that's all the in, and then paid our taxes and paid our payables, all of the out. We call that an all-in, all-out numbers. So far, we asked Steve to do two things. Number one, subdivide his bank accounts so that each dollar goes where it needs to go and doesn't leak out. The second thing is to track all of that cash and any cash you owe or are owed. After following this for about 6 months, Steve comes back and he says this, hey, this is voodoo. How is it that I generated less money than last year, but have more cash in my bank accounts? Well, it's simple. He made each dollar accountable to its own destination. The third technique is you've got to know your pricing and your margin. If you want to increase profits and increase margin, you got to know what your pricing is and understand how margin plays in. Most of you are guessing when you're doing any pricing as it relates to your product. It's as if you're recreating your pricing wheel every time, and it's usually dependent on the amount of desperation you feel in the moment. We must stop guessing and we must start knowing. Remember this, pricing should always be based on value. I'm going to ask you the same question, but in two different ways. Number one, hey, how much is this project going to cost? That's a money-based question. The second version of that question is, hey, how much would you pay if this project were done for you? That's a value-based question. These are two primary filters to run every pricing model through. First is your own pricing calculator. Where is that tool in your business and in your bidding or pricing arsenal where you can plug in consistent numbers, cost numbers, cost of goods sold numbers, sourcing numbers, logistic numbers, material pricing numbers, whatever it might be, and you get consistent numbers out based on predetermined percentages that are healthy and are profitable? Where's your own pricing calculator? This can be built on a simple spreadsheet. The second filter to run your pricing through is the filter of value. Once you have a final number from your objective calculator that you build, then take that number and run it through a subjective value thought. Hey, is it worth X to the client for this project to be completed in this amount of time? One other thing Steve did when he put those money processes in place is he began predictably pricing jobs even in the midst of price increases and material delays. 3 ways he did this. Steve communicated the volatility to clients up front and throughout. Steve then relentlessly followed every dollar that funneled in and out of the job through a simple job costing spreadsheet for his industry. Finally, Steve understood the difference between markup and margin. Margin is what you have left over after cost of goods and materials are removed from revenue, but that's not markup. Markup is when you mark up the increase of a price to determine its final selling price so that you can make a healthy margin. When it comes to pricing, understand your markup and you will earn a healthy margin. When you have a healthy margin, now you have options. So 3 techniques that all require time and attention. Number 1, subdivide your bank accounts if you want to increase your profit. Number 2, create a simple tracking dashboard if you want to keep your profit. And number 3, price for value and not for time through predictable communication, giving a home to every dollar, and predetermining a healthy markup to provide a freedom-giving margin.